Welcome to this deep dive. If you are listening to us right now, you might be in the early stages of planning your annual leave.
Right.
Or maybe you are actively building out a honeymoon itinerary.
Yeah.
Or perhaps you're just intensely curious about the hidden mechanics of how the world's most famous destinations actually operate behind the curtain. Because our mission today is highly specific. We are bypassing the glossy tourism board rhetoric. We are ignoring the meticulously color-graded social media reels.
Well, yeah, those reels.
Right. And we are stepping far away from the carefully curated luxury aesthetic. Today, we're digging into the uncompromising ground truth reality of traveling to Santorini, Greece in the year 2026.
And to accomplish that, we're looking through an incredibly revealing piece of source material. We have a comprehensively detailed and frankly brutally honest travel and logistical dossier.
It really is.
It strips away the romance completely. Instead of treating the island as a beautiful backdrop, it treats it as a functioning or perhaps severely malfunctioning logistical system.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
The dossier provides a breakdown of the exact financial costs, the structural traps, and the raw, lived experiences of navigating this specific microeconomy today.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because the dossier drops a central contrarian claim right in its executive summary that fundamentally rewrites how we should view this destination.
It does.
The claim is simply this: Santorini's core infrastructure has permanently failed.
Yeah.
Now, anyone who follows travel news has probably seen the headlines over the last few years about the daily cap of 8,000 cruise ship passengers.
The famous cap?
Right, that number was heavily marketed to the world as a victory, a sign that the island was successfully managing over-tourism. But the dossier reveals that this cap is nothing more than a mathematical fiction.
It is entirely ignored in practice. The data in the dossier tracks actual disembarkations, and the numbers are staggering. The reality is that the number of tourists pouring off those megaships into the port is hitting 15,000 people every single day, and that is a sustained influx from June straight through to September. What's fascinating here is the sheer scale of the disconnect between the marketed fantasy of a serene Greek getaway and the 2026 reality.
But surely, if the island is taking in that many people, they must have upgraded the facilities to handle the volume. I mean, they are generating massive revenue.
You would assume that, but from a purely analytical standpoint, that assumption is where travelers get trapped. The core infrastructure, the roads, the water supply, the waste management, cannot physically support the population density. You have travelers paying a massive, unparalleled premium to visit an island that is actively sinking under its own logistical weight. Allocating a significant portion of a hard-earned travel budget to a destination where the baseline infrastructure is fundamentally broken is, frankly, a very poor investment.
It really is.
The gap between what you think you are buying and what the island can actually deliver is incredibly vast.
And that vast gap is exactly why we are doing this deep dive for you today. Whether you are prepping for a once-in-a-lifetime trip, considering a broader backpacking route across Europe, or you are just fascinated by the sheer economics of over-tourism, we're going to lay the entire system out for you.
Right.
By the end of this conversation, you will have the raw data to decide if this destination is genuinely worth your time, your money, and your physical energy. We need to start with what the dossier calls the macro reality check.
We are looking at capacity, crowds, and climate.
Exactly. The structural failures actually begin the very moment you try to enter the main town from the water. The dossier highlights the Fira cable car as a primary, unavoidable choke point.
To understand why it's a choke point, we have to look at the geography. Fira is the main town, perched roughly 400 meters up on a sheer cliff. To get up there from the old port where the cruise ship tender boats drop you, you have a few options, but the primary one is this cable car.
Right.
The dossier calculates that taking this route in peak summer results in an average 3-hour wait.
3 hours just to get from the boat to the town.
Yes.
And we're talking about doing this in 35 degrees Celsius heat, which is about 95 degrees Fahrenheit. You're just standing on a concrete dock, baking in the Mediterranean sun.
Precisely. You are waiting for a cable car system that was built decades ago and was never engineered to handle 15,000 daily arrivals. It has a strict mathematical limit on how many people it can move per hour.
And they exceed it.
When you exceed that limit by thousands, the result is a permanent human traffic jam.
I have to play devil's advocate here. If it's a known bottleneck creating a 3-hour wait, why doesn't the local government just build a larger, high-capacity cable car system? It seems like a solvable engineering problem.
It sounds simple on paper, but the dossier points out that it is essentially impossible due to the geology of the island. The sheer cliff isn't solid granite. It is composed of highly unstable volcanic ash, pumice, and scoria. You cannot simply blast into it and anchor the massive steel pylons required for a modern high-capacity industrial cable car without risking a localized collapse of the cliff face.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, historical preservation laws heavily restrict altering the visual aesthetic of the caldera. So, they are trapped. The infrastructure cannot scale to meet the demand. The dossier notes that this 3-hour wait essentially destroys the first day of any itinerary. You arrive full of energy, and before you even reach your hotel lobby, you are physically depleted.
But the structural failures detailed in the source material go way beyond transportation. There is an entire section dedicated to what it labels the water rationing reality.
Yes.
And this is something you literally never see on a travel vlog. The dossier claims that you can be staying in a nice hotel and simply have the water turn off. How is a luxury island running out of tap water?
It comes down to basic resource management on an island with no natural rivers or large aquifers. Santorini relies almost entirely on desalination plants. These are complex industrial facilities that pull in seawater, push it through reverse osmosis membranes, and pump out fresh water.
Which requires an enormous amount of electricity, right?
An immense amount. And that is where the system breaks down. The island's power grid relies heavily on shipped-in diesel fuel to run its generators. In 2026, when you have the baseline population of locals, plus tens of thousands of tourists, and crucially, thousands of air conditioning units running at maximum capacity to fight the July heat,
The grid just overloads.
the power grid hits its absolute maximum load. When the grid maxes out, the desalination pumps have to be throttled down or temporarily shut off to prevent a total island-wide blackout.
So because everyone is running their AC, the plants can't produce water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The mathematical output of the water plants drops below the real-time consumption of the hotels. The reservoir tanks on the roofs drain faster than they can fill. The result is unannounced, rolling water cuts.
That is wild.
You could return from that sweaty 3-hour wait at the cable car, walk into your mid-range hotel room, turn the tap, and find absolutely nothing.
The dossier goes on to suggest this isn't just an accident of peak season, but that the island is almost functioning in a way that actively pushes certain demographics away.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source material argues that Santorini is, whether deliberately or through market forces, executing a very specific economic sorting strategy.
A sorting strategy.
Yes. The compounding friction, the prices, the waits, the utility failures serves as an exclusionary barrier. The island is effectively pushing away independent backpackers and budget travelers.
Right.
The goal is to optimize the space for two highly profitable demographics. Ultra-luxury honeymooners who stay hidden in isolated resorts paying exorbitant nightly rates, and high-volume, low-duration cruise passengers who drop money quickly at the port shops and leave by sunset.
So the middle gets squeezed out.
If you fall into the middle-class comfort tier, the baseline infrastructure is actively working against your ability to enjoy the trip.
It is fascinating to think of a destination operating like a nightclub bouncer, subtly pricing out the people it doesn't want. Let's pivot to another massive misconception the dossier targets. The weather.
Right.
Because everyone assumes they want to go to the Greek islands in July or August. High summer, perfect beach weather. The source material completely obliterates this idea, dedicating a large portion to what it calls the weather trap.
Yes, the Meltemi ones.
It introduces this meteorological phenomenon. I'd never even heard of this. What exactly is happening in the Aegean Sea in the summer?
The Meltemi are dry, incredibly powerful northern winds that sweep across the Aegean Sea specifically during the high summer months of July and August. They are created by high-pressure systems over the Balkans meeting low-pressure systems over Turkey. And we need to be clear, these are not gentle, refreshing sea breezes.
No, the dossier specifically clocks them at 30 to 40 knots on a regular basis. For context, that is a near gale force wind.
It is highly aggressive. Because the islands act as a funnel, the wind accelerates as it hits Santorini. It kicks up volcanic dust from the unpaved roads, it violently knocks over patio furniture, and it makes outdoor dining a miserable, chaotic experience.
The dossier paints this one visual that I cannot stop thinking about. Imagine you have spent 800 euros, which is roughly 864 US dollars, for a single night in a premium luxury suite.
Okay.
You booked it specifically because it has a beautiful private plunge pool looking out over the water. You walk out to your terrace, and you cannot even sit in the water because you are getting aggressively sandblasted by a 40-knot wind.
Yes.
You are paying a massive premium for an outdoor amenity that the local climate literally prevents you from using.
It is a perfect example of asynchronous travel planning. Tourists book based on the calendar, assuming July equals flawless summer weather, without researching the specific microclimate of the Cyclades Islands. They purchase a fantasy that the environment itself refuses to accommodate.
But the dossier doesn't just present the problems. It does offer a highly specific solution. It outlines what it calls the secret season. If you want the visual aesthetic of Santorini without the structural collapse and the howling winds, the source states you must target very narrow windows, late April to mid-May or the last 2 weeks of October.
The data supporting those specific weeks is compelling. First, the cruise ship volume drops by a massive 60%.
Huge difference.
The daily influx falls from 15,000 down to a much more manageable number. The physical crowds and the narrow alleyways thin out immensely. Second, the daytime temperatures sit at a perfectly comfortable 22 degrees Celsius, or about 72 degrees Fahrenheit.
Beautiful.
And crucially, the high-pressure systems haven't aligned yet, so you avoid the Meltemi winds entirely.
And from a financial perspective, the dossier notes that during these windows, the premium rooms, those famous cliffside suites with the iconic views, are priced up to 40% cheaper than their July peak. Sounds like the perfect travel strategy.
It is highly strategic, yes, but the dossier includes a very specific caveat regarding the secret season that travelers frequently overlook.
Right, and I have to highlight this enthusiastically because it is such a massive trade-off. If you go in late April, the crowds are gone and the wind is calm. But the agency is a freezing 16 degrees Celsius.
Yes.
That is about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Unless you are actively training for cold water immersion therapy, beach swimming is completely off the table. You cannot casually wade into the Mediterranean.
Which means it requires a fundamental recalibration of what you expect from the trip. If your primary objective is exploring the architecture, taking uncrowded photographs, and eating at restaurants without reservations, the secret season is optimal.
Makes sense.
If your dream vacation involves swimming in the ocean and lounging in a bikini, an April visit will deeply disappoint you. You are trading aquatic activities for atmospheric peace.
To really hammer home how drastically this island's ecosystem changes, let's do a rapid-fire summary of the dossier's month-by-month breakdown, January through March. The island is functionally dormant. Temperatures hover between 10 and 16 degrees Celsius. Most restaurants and hotels are boarded up for renovations, but if you can find a room, it is up to 60% cheaper than the baseline.
Then you transition into the danger zone, July and August. This is when the island is pushed to 140% of its physical capacity. Extreme crowds, the Meltemi winds are howling, and prices spike up to 180% above the baseline average.
Ouch.
The dossier explicitly notes that during this period, the public bus system, known as KTTL, completely buckles. Buses will regularly drive straight past people waiting at designated stops because the aisles are already packed to the doors. You are just left stranded on the side of a dusty road in 35-degree heat.
And finally, November and December. The winter shutdown begins again. The takeaway from this macro view is incredibly clear. Timing is not just a casual preference for Santorini in 2026. It is the single most critical factor that will dictate whether your trip is a stunning success or a logistical nightmare.
Let's transition from the macro planning to the micro execution. The dossier provides a phenomenal breakdown of what it calls touchdown.
The first 24 hours.
The first 24 hours on the ground and the immediate sensory shock of arrival. It maps out the specific arrival vectors and the traps associated with each.
Yes, let's look at the ferry arrival first. A lot of travelers arrive this way when they're island hopping from places like Mykonos or Crete. You arrive at Athenios port. The description the source provides here is incredibly intense. Thousands of passengers are dumped simultaneously from the bowels of these massive ferries onto a tiny, narrow concrete strip at the very bottom of a massive towering cliff face.
And here is where you encounter the very first infrastructural trap. The dossier reveals that the local taxi cartel has successfully limited the entire island to exactly 39 official taxis.
I have to stop you there, because that number broke my brain when I read it. 39 taxis.
Yes.
For an island seeing 15,000 arrivals a day, how does a modern European destination function with fewer taxis than a small rural town?
It functions exactly as intended by the people who hold those medallions. A taxi license in Greece is a heavily protected, highly lucrative asset often passed down through generations. The local union vehemently opposes the local government issuing any new medallions
Why?
because artificial scarcity keeps the prices exorbitant. If you introduce rideshare apps or 200 new official taxis, the supply meets the demand and the cartel's revenue drops.
So the local government just capitulates to the cartel.
The political pressure is immense, and frankly, the road infrastructure couldn't handle hundreds of new taxis anyway. The bottleneck is maintained at the direct expense of the traveler. Because the official supply is choked at 39, the price of alternative private transport skyrockets.
Right.
If you want a private van transfer for the 20-minute drive up the cliff from the ferry port to your hotel, it will cost you between 60 to 80 euros, which is roughly 65 to 86 US dollars.
The dossier makes a brutal comparison here. That 80 € fee is the price of an entire domestic flight in many other parts of Europe. And you are spending it just to travel a couple of miles up a hill the absolute moment you step off the boat.
Now, you might think you can outsmart this by flying in instead. The source material analyzes the airport arrival vector as well. When you land at the airport, it initially seems like a massive logistical win. There is a public KTL bus waiting right outside the terminal to take you to the main town of Fira, and it only costs 2 euros, or about $2.15.
Right. You pay your 2 euros, you get on the bus, and you are thinking, I completely beat the system. But the dossier pulls the rug out from under the strategy, too. The trap is the routing.
Exactly.
The airport bus only goes to the central hub in Fira. If you booked one of those romantic luxury hotels in Oia, which is located at the far northern tip of the island, you cannot just stay on the bus. You have to take the first bus to Fira, physically disembark, and drag your luggage through the incredibly chaotic, crowded Fira bus terminal to find a second, entirely separate bus heading to Oia.
What looks like a brilliant, cheap travel hack on paper instantly devolves into a 2-hour, sweat-soaked ordeal. You are navigating jagged volcanic cobblestones, massive crowds of day trippers in intense heat, dragging a 20-kilogram suitcase all before you have even reached your hotel lobby to check in. It results in a rapid, massive depletion of your travel stamina.
And that physical depletion feeds perfectly into one of my favorite sections of the dossier. It maps out what it brilliantly calls the psychological arc of the traveler. It breaks down your mental state during the first day on the island. Let's walk through this, hours 1 to 3. The dossier calls this the euphoria phase.
A honeymoon phase.
This is when you finally make it to the cliff edge. You see that impossible blue and white contrast, the sheer cliff dropping into the dark sea, the exact view you've seen in a million photographs. It is genuinely breathtaking.
It is the delivery of the aesthetic promise. But then, as the dossier outlines, hours 4 to 8 set in. This is labeled logistical friction. This occurs when you leave the sanctuary of your hotel room to actually explore. You quickly realize that navigating the island means constantly climbing steep, highly uneven stairs.
Right.
You find yourself physically pinned against stone walls in narrow alleyways as massive tour groups, led by guides holding up numbered paddles, aggressively push past you. The physical grinding reality of the sheer density of humans begins to aggressively erode the initial euphoria.
Here's where it gets really interesting, or maybe just incredibly painful. Hours 9 to 14. The financial shock phase. You are exhausted from the physical friction of walking through the crowd, so you find a nice taverna and sit down for dinner. You open the menu, and the raw reality of the 2026 Santorini microeconomy hits you.
Hard.
A basic Greek salad is listed at 24 euros. A standard locally brewed beer is 10 euros. You are looking at over 35 US dollars just for a side salad and a beer.
Which naturally forces the traveler into the final phase of first 24 hours, hours 15 to 24, recalibration. You realize that you cannot simply wing it on this island. The casual, spontaneous vacation mindset, where you just drop into a cafe because it looks cute, vanishes.
Going.
You realize that doing so without checking the prices first could result in a 100 euro bill for coffee and pastries. To financially survive the rest of your trip, you must immediately become a tactical planner, aggressively scrutinizing every transport choice, every route, and every menu. The serendipity of travel is replaced by logistical defense.
What makes this source material so compelling is that it doesn't just give us the cold numbers and the psychology. It dives deep into the sensory reality of being there. It talks about the olfactory and auditory details.
Let's talk about the actual smell of Santorini, because it is not just sea breeze. The dossier describes the olfactory landscape as a profound study in contrasts, dictated entirely by elevation. If you are up high on the Caldera Rim, walking through the luxury enclaves of Oria or Fira, the predominant scent is a dense, heavy mixture of expensive designer perfumes and colognes worn by the tourists dressing up for photo shoots.
But there's a catch.
Right? A significant one. Because these narrow pathways are inaccessible to delivery vehicles, they are constantly traversed by donkeys used to haul heavy luggage and construction materials. So, that high-end designer perfume is sharply and constantly cut with the acidic, unmistakable smell of baking donkey dung in the hot Mediterranean sun.
Honestly, the ultimate metaphor for the entire island. High-end glamour violently colliding with raw medieval logistics. But the dossier notes that if you get away from the cliff edge, if you go inland or down by the black sand beaches, the smell shifts completely. You smell the dry sea salt coming off the water, the roasted garlic from the local family-run tavernas, and the wild oregano that grows naturally in the arid hills.
The auditory experience is equally jarring compared to the fantasy. People fly to a Greek island imagining they will be lulled to sleep by the rhythmic sound of ocean waves crashing on the shore.
That's the dream.
The reality up on the cliff is vastly different. The baseline acoustic hum of the island is the mechanical drone of literally thousands of air conditioning compressors running at maximum capacity to fight the heat. And layered over that drone is the constant erratic rolling rattle of hard-shell plastic suitcases being dragged over uneven cobblestone streets by exhausted tourists searching for their hotels.
There's this one specific anecdote in the source that just perfectly encapsulates the sheer chaos of this sensory clash. Picture this scene. A couple, dressed to the absolute nines in full formal wedding attire. The bride in a massive gown, the groom in a tuxedo.
Setting the scene.
They're standing near the famous three blue domes in Oidia, trying to get that perfect, serene, once-in-a-lifetime romantic photograph. And while they're trying to hold this serene pose, they are actively getting yelled at by a deeply frustrated, sweating local water delivery driver. Of course.
He is desperately trying to push a heavy metal hand truck loaded with massive water bottles right through the middle of their photo shoot, simply because it is the only path forward, and he is trying to navigate through a dense crowd of 200 other people just to do his job. It is the polished fantasy literally clashing with the failing infrastructure in real time.
It is a striking visual, and it underscores how the space itself is contested. And that perfectly transitions us into understanding the unique geography of the island, because the dossier makes it abundantly clear where you choose to stay physically on the island fundamentally dictates which version of Santorini you will experience. The source material breaks down the island into distinct zones, primarily focusing on the economics of what it calls the Caldera Premium.
We keep using the word caldera. Before we break down the zones, geologically speaking, what are we actually looking at here? I think a lot of people just picture a really tall cliff next to the ocean. It is much more dramatic than a standard cliff. Roughly 3,600 years ago, Santorini was a single circular island. It experienced one of the largest volcanic eruptions in recorded history, the Minoan eruption.
Right.
The center of the island literally blew itself into the stratosphere, and the remaining land collapsed inward into the empty magma chamber. The sea rushed in to fill the void. So the cliff that everyone builds these luxury hotels on is not a normal coastline. It is the sheer vertical inner wall of a sunken volcanic crater. That extreme verticality is what creates both the stunning views and the absolute logistical nightmares.
Okay, that context makes the zone breakdown make so much more sense. Let's look at the first zone, Oya. This is the ultra-luxury epicenter at the northern tip. It is the postcard you see everywhere. The dossier notes that if you want a mid-range room here, and mid-range in Oya means you do not have a view of the water and you are sharing thin walls with neighbors, you are paying 250 to 400 euros a night.
Yes.
If you want the true luxury experience with the view, it is 1,200 to 3,000 plus euros per night.
And here is the bizarre, yet slightly horrifying detail the dossier points out about that specific luxury tier in Oya. Because the crater wall is essentially vertical, the architecture is stacked directly on top of itself. Because of this layout, the main public walking path frequently runs directly above the private terraces of these ultra-luxury suites.
So you pay 2,000 euros for a single night, to sit in your private romantic plunge pool looking out the volcano.
Exactly. But what the glossy brochures don't show you is that while you are trying to enjoy that private moment, hundreds of tourists are standing on the public cobblestone path 10 feet directly above your head, looking down at you, pointing and taking photographs.
Wow.
The source material argues that at that price point, your private luxury experience is completely exposed to the masses.
You are basically paying thousands of euros to be an exhibit in a luxury human zoo. Okay, moving south along the crater rim, we had the second zone, Fira. This is the commercial and administrative hub. It is where the cruise ship passengers come up the cable car. The dossier notes, you can find budget beds here for 50 to 80 euros a night, which sounds like an incredible deal for the location.
But the dossier immediately warns of the severe auditory cost associated with those budget beds. Fira is the nightlife center of the island. The narrow stone alleyways act like a canyon, amplifying sound. The source warns that heavy, thumping bass blasts from the clubs until 4 a.m. If you are a light sleeper or just looking for rest after a long day of walking, those budget beds will cost you your sleep.
Then you have the third zone, Immervigli. This village sits at the absolute highest, most central point of the caldera rim. It is marketed as the quiet luxury alternative. It boasts the magnificent views of Oaia without the suffocating foot traffic of the day trippers. Mid-range here is 200 to 350 euros. Luxury is around 1,500. But the dossier flags a massive physical catch.
The catch is the sheer verticality. Immervigli has the steepest, most punishing, violently winding stairs on the entire island. You are essentially scaling the highest peak of the crater wall.
Sounds exhausting.
If you have bad knees, any mobility issues whatsoever, or simply brought heavy, oversized luggage, reaching your quiet luxury retreat becomes a daily, agonizing physical nightmare. There are no elevators carved into the volcanic rock.
And finally, we have to talk about the completely opposite side of the island. The east and south coasts, specifically towns like Camari and Parisa. These are the black sand beach towns. The geography here is flat. It is conventional. It slopes gently into the sea. Backpacker dorms here are 30 to 60 euros. Mid-range hotels are 120 to 200 euros. It is vastly cheaper than the cliffside. But the dossier delivers a harsh reality check here, too.
2 reality checks, in fact. First, regarding the beaches themselves. The volcanic black sand absorbs all incoming solar radiation. The thermodynamics of it mean that it gets so incredibly hot it will literally blister your bare feet by midday.
Blister them.
You cannot walk on it without shoes. Second, the geographical isolation. If you stay in Parisa, you are a 30-minute public bus ride away from the famous caldera views that likely inspired your trip to Santorini in the first place.
Which brings us to a really fascinating value debate that the source material highlights. You have to ask yourself a fundamental question about the economics and purpose of your travel. Does it make mathematical sense to stay in Parisa, pay a highly reasonable 120 euros a night for a nice room, and just take a €2 bus ride to see the famous view once or twice during your entire trip?
From a pure numbers standpoint, absolutely. It is the most financially logical decision. But the dossier poses the counter-argument. If you fly all the way across the world to visit Santorini, Greece, an island globally renowned for its specific cliffside architecture and volcanic views, and you choose to stay in a generic, flat beach resort that looks indistinguishable from any other coastal town in southern Europe, are you missing the entire point of the destination?
That's a great point.
You have to ponder what you value more, protecting your wallet or immersing yourself in the specific, unique aesthetic experience of the caldera.
That is the ultimate traveler's dilemma, perfectly articulated. Okay, we need to pivot from where you sleep to what you eat. Let's talk about the culinary economy, grocery shopping, and local etiquette. Because here's where it gets really interesting. The dossier reveals that Santorini does not have a single unified food market. It operates on a strict, highly segregated, two-tiered food economy.
Yes, the source clearly delineates between the caldera view economy and the inland beach economy. And the price discrepancy between these two tiers for the exact same physical calories is staggering.
Let me give you the exact numbers from the dossier because they're hard to believe until you hear them. Let's look at a classic, simple, staple Greek meal, a pork pita gyro. If you buy this at a local spot slightly inland or down in one of the beach towns away from the cliff edge, it will cost you between 4 euros and 50 cents to 6 euros.
Standard pricing.
Now, if you want to eat the exact same food, plated at a restaurant sitting just 50 meters away, but positioned right on the edge of the caldera cliff, that exact same gyro will cost you 28 euros.
It is effectively a 400% markup based entirely on real estate positioning.
But hold on, let me push back on that for a second. Couldn't a restaurant owner argue that getting fresh ingredients all the way up that massive cliff face, navigating those stairs with hand trucks, genuinely costs more in labor? Is it entirely just a real estate markup, or are the supply chain costs legitimately driving that price up?
It is a fair question, and the dossier addresses it. Yes, there is a marginal increase in supply chain costs. You are paying the delivery driver who has to manually haul crates up the stairs.
Right.
But the raw ingredients for a pork gyro, the meat, the pita, the tzatziki cost, mere pennies wholesale. A slight labor increase does not mathematically justify a jump from €5 to €28. The dossier concludes that the 400% markup is entirely about the view.
Just the view.
Similarly, a slice of fresh spinach pie at a local bakery is €3. But if you sit down for a mid-range dinner for two on the Caldera Edge, you are looking at a bill of €120 to €150 before you even order a bottle of wine.
So what exactly are you buying?
What is crucial to analyze here is the nature of the transaction. When you pay €150 for that dinner, you are not paying for culinary innovation. You are not paying for significantly better quality ingredients. You are effectively renting a temporary sunset viewing platform.
Wow.
The food is entirely secondary to the real estate. If you accept that premise, that you are buying a 2-hour theater ticket to watch the sun go down over a sunken volcano, and the food is just a prop provided during the show, the financial blow might be easier to rationalize. But you must enter the restaurant understanding the true nature of the transaction.
If you are like me and you do not want to buy an expensive theater ticket every single night, the dossier provides an absolute lifeline. You have to understand the local supermarket landscape. Specifically, it points to a massive supermarket called Sklavenitis, located just outside the main town of Fira. The dossier insists that integrating a visit to this place into your logistics is an absolute necessity if you want to avoid the brutal tourist convenience markups.
The economic contrast at a place like Sklavenitis compared to the tiny mini-marts located in Oia is profound. Sklavenitis caters to the actual local Greeks living on the island. Its supply chain is optimized for bulk pallet delivery, bringing the cost down to mainland levels. You can buy a 6-pack of 1.5-liter water bottles for €1.70.
That's incredible.
A full kilogram of chicken breast is €8.50. A can of local Greek beer is €1.40. The dossier also mentions a secondary chain called Masudis, located near the airport, which offers similar baseline pricing. If you are staying in an Airbnb or any accommodation with a kitchenette, making a strategic grocery run upon arrival is non-negotiable for budget control.
And while we're on the topic of food and dining out, we absolutely have to cover the crucial cultural etiquette the dossier lays out, because nothing screams clueless tourist louder than breaking these unwritten rules. Number one, when you are sitting at a local taverna with friends, do not demand to split the bill item by item with the waiter.
It is culturally grating. In Greece, it is expected that dining is a communal experience. The bill comes to the center of the table and is paid as a single unified amount. You sort out who owes what among yourselves later.
Number two is regarding tipping. In 2026, the dossier strongly advises leaving a 10% tip in physical euro coins directly on the table.
The structural issue here is that tips added digitally via credit card machines frequently do not make it down to the actual waiting staff due to management practices or taxation structures. Leaving physical cash ensures your tip directly reaches the person who physically served you.
And number three, oh man, this is the one that consistently gets everyone, the plumbing rule. You cannot flush toilet paper anywhere on the entire island of Santorini. Everything goes into a small bin placed next to the toilet. The dossier jokes about this, but it is a harsh reality. This consistently horrifies first-time visitors who have just dropped €1,000 for a single night in an ultra-luxury suite, only to find out they have to put their soiled toilet paper in an open trash can. It shatters the luxury illusion instantly. Why on earth hasn't this been fixed?
Because it is an infrastructure problem deeply embedded in the rock. The plumbing networks were laid decades ago, long before mass tourism. They use incredibly narrow ceramic pipes, often only 2 inches in diameter, and they have sharp, irregular angles as they navigate the solid volcanic rock.
That sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
If you flush paper, it catches on the rough joint, swells up, and causes a catastrophic backup. Fixing it would require drilling massive new trenches deep into the solid cliff face, which would destabilize the very ground the hotels are built on. You can build a beautiful, modern infinity pool on the surface, but you cannot easily replace the foundational plumbing hidden inside a volcano.
Okay, we have covered the flights, the hotels, the food, and the plumbing. Let's talk about the actual daily out-of-pocket budgets. The dossier breaks down 3 distinct traveler archetypes and calculates what it functionally costs them to survive on the island each day, completely excluding the cost of their flights and accommodation. Let's start with what it calls the survivalist. This person is trying to do Santorini on 65 euros, or about 70 US dollars a day.
The dossier describes this tier not as a vacation, but as an exercise in extreme, exhausting discipline. To maintain a 65 euro daily budget, you are relying entirely on the KTEL public bus system, which we already established involves long waits in the baking sun, crowded aisles, and unreliability. For food, you are exclusively eating those 5 euro gyros, grabbing cheap bakery pastries, and cooking pasta you bought from Sclavenitis in your hostel kitchen.
So you are functionally surviving, but are you actually enjoying the island?
That is the core issue the dossier raises. You are surviving, but the psychological toll of the friction is high. When you are a low-budget traveler trapped in a hyperinflated environment designed explicitly to cater to ultra-luxury spending, every single transaction becomes a source of stress.
Right, you're constantly doing math in your head.
Exactly. You cannot stop for a coffee when you are tired. You cannot grab a water bottle without calculating the markup. You are essentially pressed up against the glass looking in at the vacation everyone else is having.
Next up is the comfort traveler. This budget jumps to 150 to 220 euros a day, roughly 162 to 237 USD out of pocket. This sounds a lot more realistic for someone wanting a nice, low-stress vacation.
This budget tier unlocks a genuinely good, fluid experience, but the dossier notes it still requires strategic, deliberate choices. With 200 euros a day, you can afford to rent a mid-tier scooter to completely bypass the public bus queues. You can afford casual, sit-down lunches at inland tavernas, and perhaps split the cost of a shared sunset catamaran cruise. Most importantly, this tier buys you the freedom to move around the island and eat reasonably well without constantly checking your banking app with a knot in your stomach.
And finally, we have the splurger. This is 500 plus euros or 540 plus US dollars every single day, just on activities, transport, and food. You are hiring private drivers to avoid the taxi cartel, you're eating those 250 euro Caldera Edge dinners, and you are renting 150 euro reserved cabanas at the high-end beach clubs.
And here is the sharpest analytical takeaway from the dossier regarding the splurger tier. You are not necessarily buying better quality experiences. The beach is the same beach. The sunset is the same sunset. What you are actually doing is paying exorbitant rates to buy a 5-meter radius of quiet in a very loud, crowded place. You are paying a massive premium simply for isolation from the masses.
Which leads us perfectly into the 3 major logistical traps the dossier explicitly warns about. It argues that if you don't know these specific traps are coming, they will fundamentally ruin your trip regardless of which budget tier you are in. Let's look at trap number 1, the cruise ship tender trap.
We touched on this earlier when discussing the fire cable car, but we need to explain the mechanics of how the trap springs. The modern mega cruise ships are so large, and the water inside the sunken caldera crater is so incredibly deep that they cannot physically drop anchor or dock at a pier. Instead, they dynamically position themselves out in the bay. They then deploy fleets of small tender boats to continuously funnel up to 15,000 people toward a small old port where they all bottleneck at a cable car that holds only 36 people at a time.
It sounds like a logistical disaster movie, 15,000 people funneling into a 36-person carriage. But the dossier gives a brilliant, highly actionable fix for this. Before you even book your flights, or definitely while you are mapping out your daily itinerary, it says you must check a specific maritime website called cruisemapper.com. You look up your specific travel dates. If the total passenger count of the ships scheduled to anchor in the caldera exceeds 6,000 people on a given day, the rules is absolute. Completely avoid the cliffside towns of Fira and Oya between 10:00 a.m. and 4:00 p.m.
Just do not go near them.
Right. Retreat inland, go to the remote beaches, or stay in your hotel pool.
The dossier also offers a micro-strategy for this trap. If you are staying in Fira and you want to explore the rest of the island using the cheap public buses, you must physically leave Fira on a KTL bus by 8:30 in the morning. Why 8:30? Because if you leave early, you bypass the massive herd before the tender boats even start dropping the thousands of day trippers ashore. You stay ahead of the wave.
Let's move to trap number 2, the ATV, or quad bike illusion. I see this on social media constantly. Influencers rent these rugged-looking 4-wheel ATVs. It looks incredibly fun, hair blowing in the wind, cruising along the cliff edge at sunset. The dossier completely shatters this vlog fantasy.
It shatters it with basic physics. The terrifying reality is that these ATVs are specialized off-road vehicles. When you put them on paved, winding, steep asphalt roads, they perform terribly. They are heavy, their solid rear axles make cornering stiff and unpredictable, and crucially, they lack anti-lock braking systems, or ABS.
So paint the picture of what actually happens on the road.
You are an inexperienced tourist on a steep, winding road with a sheer drop to the ocean. You are moving slowly, maybe 30 kilometers an hour, enjoying the view, but right behind you is an angry local cement truck driver who is on a tight delivery schedule, aggressively tailgating you because you are blocking the single lane of traffic.
Oh no.
The safety risk is immense. You panic on a sharp curve that happens to be dusted with loose gravel, you slam on the brakes hard without ABS, the wheels lock up, and the heavy ATV flips over.
The dossier is adamant about the fix here. It says unequivocally, do not rent an ATV. If you have an actual motorcycle license and real experience riding on two wheels, rent a 125cc scooter for around 35 to 45 euros a day. A scooter has the agility to safely pull over to the shoulder and let the heavy cement truck pass. If you do not have two-wheel experience, do not try to learn on a cliff. Rent a battered small car like a Fiat Panda for about 60 euros. It has air conditioning, doors to protect you from the dust, and most importantly, airbags.
This brings us to trap number 3. The Caldera View restaurant minimums. This trap relies entirely on social pressure and embarrassment.
Imagine this scenario. You are walking through the narrow streets of Oya. It is 6:30 p.m., about an hour before the famous sunset. You are tired, and you suddenly spot a beautiful, completely empty table right on the cliff edge. You sit down, thinking you'll just order a cold glass of white wine, rest your feet, and watch the view. Suddenly, the waiter appears and loudly informs you that there is a 100 to 150 euro minimum spend per person just to occupy that specific chair during the sunset hour.
And here's where the psychology kicks in. The restaurant knows that many tourists, once seated, feel too socially awkward or embarrassed to stand up, refuse the terms, and walk away. So they silently accept it and end up locked into a 300 euro bill for a sunset they could have watched for free standing on the public path 10 feet away. It is essentially a financial hostage situation.
The dossier's fix for this is flawless. It states, never ever walk into a View restaurant without a confirmed reservation where you have already agreed to the pricing terms. If you want a sunset drink without the extortion, the strategy is simple. Take a trip to the Mazzuti supermarket. Buy a highly rated 20 euro bottle of local Asturtico wine. Walk over to the Byzantine castle ruins in Adea 2 full hours early to claim your spot on the stone wall, and drink your excellent wine out of plastic cups. It is the exact same geological view for a fraction of the cost without the stress.
Discussing the ATV dangers and the psychological stress naturally transitions us into the dossier's broader section on health and safety infrastructure, because the source reveals a statistic that surprises most people. The #1 risk to tourists on Santorini is not petty crime or pickpockets.
Right, with crowds that dense, you might think it is pickpockets, but it is not.
The primary statistical danger is severe road trauma. It loops exactly back to what we just discussed. Inexperienced tourists on rented scooters and ATVs crashing on gravel-dusted winding curves. And this is where the limitations of the island's infrastructure elevate a bad accident into a matter of life or death. The Santorini General Hospital is essentially a local clinic that becomes chronically understaffed during the peak summer season.
This detail legitimately terrified me. If you suffer a serious trauma, say a bad compound fracture from an ATV rollover, the local hospital cannot handle complex surgeries. They simply do not have the facilities or the specialized surgeons.
Exactly. Which means you require an immediate medical airlift via helicopter to a major trauma hospital in Athens. And the dossier notes that an emergency airlift costs a minimum of 5,000 euros out of pocket. The absolute mandate here is that you cannot skip comprehensive travel insurance if you are planning to run any sort of motorized vehicle on this island.
Furthermore, there are everyday health protocols to consider. We talked extensively about the desalination plans earlier. The dossier explicitly reminds travelers, do not drink the tap water.
But we should clarify why. It is not because the water is infected with bacteria. The desalination process is highly effective at sanitizing the water, making it perfectly safe for showering or brushing your teeth. However, the process leaves behind a very heavy, unfamiliar mineral and salt content. If you drink it in large quantities, it will cause severe gastrointestinal distress simply because your body's microbiome is not accustomed to that specific mineral profile. You must rely entirely on bottled water for hydration.
There is also the reality of internet connectivity. We live in a highly connected world, and remote workers especially expect to be online constantly. The dossier notes that 5G cellular coverage is actually great, provided you're standing perfectly still outdoors in a major town.
The issue is the architecture and the rock itself. The famous cave hotels are carved deeply into dense volcanic pumice and basalt. Cellular signals cannot penetrate solid rock. Massive dead zones exist inside the accommodations. And even worse, if you are relying on hotel Wi-Fi, you are at the mercy of the power grid. As we discussed, when the summer heat hits and everyone cranks their AC, the grid overloads and the cheaper hotels simply lose power, taking the routers down with them.
The source material also provides very targeted warnings for specific traveler demographics. Let's look at solo female travelers. The good news is that violent crime and street harassment are incredibly rare. The island is generally very safe in that regard. However, the physical infrastructure poses a different, subtle threat.
The danger is logistical. If you are walking between the smaller connected villages at night after dinner, you are forced to navigate main roads that have absolutely zero streetlights and no dedicated pedestrian sidewalks. You are walking in pitch darkness while cars driven by tourists who may be unfamiliar with the roads or have been drinking heavily at sunset dinners speed past you mere inches away.
And what about families? People always want to take their kids to beautiful places. The dossier is brutally blunt here. If you have young children and require a stroller, do not, under any circumstances, stay in Oia or Imirovigli.
The physical environment is entirely hostile to childcare logistics. You are dealing with massive, unyielding crowds, completely uneven cobblestones that will destroy stroller wheels, hundreds of steep stairs that require carrying the stroller, and massive, sheer cliff drops with absolutely no safety guardrails. The dossier states that attempting to navigate this with a toddler will break your sanity.
It is all about aligning your expectations with the hard, physical reality of the environment, which leads us to what is arguably the most useful section in the entire dossier, the matrix of overhyped versus authentic experiences. It takes most famous, heavily marketed things to do on Santorini and offers a ground truth, superior alternative. Let's run through these. First up, the sunset.
The overhyped version, the one heavily promoted by every guide, is joining the masses at the Oya Castle ruins. But the reality, as the dossier outlines, is that it is suffocatingly crowded, highly stressful, and instead of a serene, romantic sunset, you are essentially looking through a dense forest of hundreds of glowing smartphone screens from the people standing directly in front of you.
The authentic alternative provided by the dossier is the Akrotiri Lighthouse, located at the extreme southern tip of the island. You sit on raw, jagged volcanic rock. It is completely free. There are far fewer people because it is geographically isolated. The catch is logistical. You absolutely need a rental vehicle to get there, as the public buses do not run that route effectively at sunset. But the payoff is a raw, uncommercialized, powerful experience of the landscape.
Next up in the matrix, beaches. The overhyped choice is the famous red beach. It is featured on every postcard because the red cliffs look striking against the blue water. But the dossier reveals that it is incredibly dangerous. The cliffs are made of highly unstable volcanic scoria, and there are active landslides. You are paying €20 for dirty, crowded sunbeds while sitting directly under literal warning signs cautioning you about falling rocks.
The authentic alternative is Vlchata Beach on the south coast. Instead of unstable red rock, you have these incredible towering moon-like pumice cliffs that have been naturally carved by the wind over millennia, meeting dark volcanic sand. The sunbeds are cheaper, the beach feels vastly more expansive and less claustrophobic, and there is a nearby marina where you can eat fresh fish caught that exact day without paying the insane caldera view markup.
Finally, we look at shopping. The overhyped experience is wandering through the main streets of Fira. The reality is that the shops are mostly selling mass-produced, imported trinkets from overseas. You are subjected to incredibly loud touts aggressively yelling at you to look at their restaurant menus, and there is very little authentic Greek culture to be found.
The authentic alternative here is the village of Pyrgos, located inland. It is built high on a hill, so you still get the beautiful aesthetic of the winding white alleys and the iconic blue domes, but it is filled with actual local artisans who have been priced out of Fira. There are quiet, shaded cafes where a coffee costs a reasonable €3.50, and you can explore old Venetian castle ruins without fighting a single cruise ship crowd.
But what if, after analyzing all of this data, the 24-euro salads, the 3-hour cable car waits, the failing plumbing, the howling Meltemi wines, what if a traveler realizes that the friction of Santorini just isn't for them?
That is the beauty of this dossier. It doesn't just tear the island down. It provides highly curated alternatives. If not here, go here. It suggests two specific Greek islands that might better serve different travel desires without the systemic collapse. The first alternative is Naxos.
You can easily reach Naxos via a fast ferry from Athens. The primary appeal here is the geography. Vast, sprawling, sandy beaches that never feel crowded. But more importantly, Naxos has a robust, independent agricultural economy. It grows its own food. This means the food is deeply authentic and incredibly cheap compared to Santorini. The economic contrast is stark. You can find excellent mid-range hotels for €70 a night. It offers the classic, relaxed Greek island feel. It feels like a real breathing community, not just a movie set built exclusively to extract wealth from tourists.
And the second alternative is Milos. If you still crave those dramatic, mind-bending volcanic landscapes and high-end boutique luxury, but you want to completely subtract the 15,000 daily cruise passengers, Milos is the answer. It is a bit pricier than Naxos, around €150 a night, but the port physically cannot handle the megaship, so the crowds are naturally capped. It boasts incredible seafood and Sarakiniko Beach, which is famous for its smooth, white volcanic rock formations that look like the surface of the moon, offering some of the most unique swimming in the entire Aegean Sea.
This raises an important question, perhaps the most critical analytical question of this entire deep dive. After meticulously breaking down the failing infrastructure, the hyperinflated economics, the massive crowds, and the extreme weather, who is Santorini actually worth it for in 2026?
The dossier doesn't pull any punches in its final verdicts. Let's go through them demographic by demographic. First, is it worth it for survivalists and backpackers? The verdict is a resounding no. The return on investment for a budget traveler is terrible. You're constantly blocked by insurmountable financial paywalls, entirely unable to access the views, the pools, or the food that made the destination famous in the first place.
Second, is it worth it for families and large groups? Again, the verdict is no. The logistical nightmares of moving a large group around, combined with the severe safety hazards of unlit roads, heavy traffic, and sheer cliffs without guardrails, make it a highly unadvisable, high-stress environment for children.
Third, is it worth it for digital nomads or solo long-term travelers? The dossier says no. I hear the term geo-arbitrage tossed around a lot in remote work circles.
Wow.
What does the dossier say about how that concept fails here?
Geo-arbitrage is the practice of earning a strong currency and living in a location with a weak local economy, allowing you to live luxuriously for a fraction of the cost. The dossier points out that Santorini completely breaks this model. The local economy is hyperinflated by luxury tourism. The exorbitant cost of living destroys any arbitrage benefit. Combine that with unreliable Wi-Fi dead zones and the fact that the island is socially geared almost exclusively toward insular romantic couples, making it profoundly isolating and expensive for solo remote workers.
Fourth, is it worth it for the comfort traveler? The mid-range budget. The verdict here is a maybe, with strict caveats. It is only worth it if you strictly travel during the secret season, May or October. You must budget at least €200 a day out of pocket, and you must possess the extreme discipline to wake up at 6:30 a.m. every single day to beat the cruise ship tenders to the sites.
And finally, is it worth it for the luxury and ultra-luxury traveler? The verdict is yes. If you possess the immense financial resources to spend €1,500 a night to retreat to a private cliffside terrace, you effectively buy your way out of the infrastructural collapse. You bypass the physical friction of the masses, you hire private drivers to bypass the taxi cartels, and you are rewarded with a visual geological spectacle that places like the Amalfi Coast simply cannot replicate. It is a destination where your experience is entirely, 100%, dictated by your ability to pay for isolation from the systemic failures occurring just outside your hotel door.
Summarizing this entire deep dive, the picture of Santorini in 2026 is one of absolute, uncompromising extremes. You have this breathtaking, unparalleled volcanic geology, but it is heavily masked by severe logistical collapse, a crumbling baseline infrastructure, and relentless hyper-commercialization. It is no longer a place you can just show up with a backpack and explore. It requires meticulous, almost military-level planning and a very specific, highly robust budget to actually extract any enjoyment from it.
So what does this all mean? If we step back from the daily budgets and the cable car waits and look at the long-term trajectory of Santorini, it presents a fascinating socioeconomic case study in modern global tourism. The dossier leaves us with a final, highly provocative thought to mull over. If an entire island's microeconomy has become entirely reliant on an illusion of exclusivity, an illusion that has been fundamentally shattered by the raw reality of mass market tourism and crumbling 20th century infrastructure, what happens to the destination and to the local culture when the Instagram generation eventually decides that the financial and physical friction is simply no longer worth the photograph and moves on to the next untouched backdrop?
Wow. That is a heavy systemic question and definitely something to think deeply about the next time you see a perfectly filtered sunset photo show up on your feed. Thank you for listening to this deep dive. Keep exploring, stay curious, and always remember to ask the hard mechanical questions about where and how you choose to travel.